February 1998. I'm still working at Illyria Arts. Oh, wait a minute. I'm not. So, in the few years that I worked at Illyria Arts, every February was slow. I'd get laid off for a week or two. But in 1998, I was told that they didn't know how long this particular layoff would be. And so if I found another job, I should take it. And I did. But that is for another video. So I worked, I don't know, a few days, a week in February of 1998 at Illyria Arts. And then I was laid off. And that was the last time I worked there. But not the last time I worked as a picture framer. But again, that's for another video. And then the only other thing of note, I'm still friends with Jane. We're still spending tons of time together, recommending books to each other, and new favorites, stuff we read as kids. She's a bit younger than me, so the things she read when she was younger, when she was a kid, a teen, were different than the things that I was reading when I was young. Things that, I was a little too old to be reading when she was reading them at that age. We'll get to some of that. But let's start with the first book of February 1998, which was recommended to me by Jane. And it is an amazing book that I have read multiple times. It's possible I would have eventually read this book on my own, but Jane recommended Relic by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. What a fantastic book. It is the New York Museum of Natural History. They're about to open this huge exhibit, but people are being murdered. And much like in Jaws with the mayor, the director of the museum, yes, doesn't want to shut anything down. He's going to keep... He wants the exhibition to open on time. And so Margot Green, who works at the museum, she is a museum researcher. She's trying to solve these murders. And this book, I think it's the first book that Preston and Child wrote together, at least the first fiction that they wrote together. And it introduces their amazing character, Pendergast. I don't remember his first name now. I want to say it's Arthur, but I can't be sure. And I'm not sure where in the book I would find his name, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time looking. But Pendergast, who's now been in like a ton of books written by Lincoln and Child. They have a bunch of standalone books. They have a couple different series. Excuse me. But, and then there's a bunch of Pendergast stuff. Who's, I believe, a federal investigator and very quirky, just a very, very cool character. So this book, if you look there, you can see there's a monster. Yeah, it's a horror novel. It's a thriller. It's a murder mystery. Till we find out that there's a monster running around, then it's not much of a mystery. Fantastic book. Great characters. Well written. Made into a movie that does not have Pendergast in it, which is insane. The best character in the book, and he's not in the movie. But I love this book. Next up, second book, February 1998. It is a book I own, but it is buried, and I do not have the patience at this time to dig it out. But it was Babylon 5, Clark's Law by Jim Mortimer. And it is, excuse me, there's murder. There's an alien race that had been conquered by the Narn, but then they took their planet back. But they had slaughtered a bunch of Narn. And now they need help rebuilding their planet, essentially. And they come to Babylon 5. Shit goes down. Sheridan, the commander, is accused of murder, I believe. And there's a lot of politics. Earth is at the height of its xenophobia. Sounds vaguely familiar. Um, for parts of Earth right now. So and there's a bunch of stuff about the death penalty. Um, I was looking at some of I tried to find a description of the book online, or at least on Amazon and Goodreads. Could not find a description. So I was looking at some of the reviews, trying to find a review that might describe the basic plot of the book, and wild range of reviews. A bunch of 1-star that say it's horribly written and the author doesn't know the characters at all, that they act completely out of character. And then I saw some 4 and 5-star reviews that say this is one of the best Babylon 5 books. It's been a while since I read it, so I can't speak to it either way. But there you go. Babylon 5, Clark's Law. Then we have Spider-Man Warrior's Revenge by Neil Barrett Jr. This is the 8th in the super thriller series of young adult books. And in this one, the Hulk comes to New York to help out a friend, but discovers that friend is under attack by the Super Skrull. Very fun character who is a Skrull. You know, the shape-changing aliens. Maybe you don't know that. But they're shape-changing aliens, but the Super Skrull has all the powers of the Fantastic Four. So like they have one arm that's all rocky, and they can stretch and do the invisibility and force fields thing and the fire thing from the Human Torch. So Hulk and Spider-Man team up to fight the Super Skrull. Fun, young adult stuff. And it's cool to see the Super Skrull in a book. Excuse me. Book number 4, another one recommended by Jane. And this is The Mummy, or Ramses the Damned, by Anne Rice. Now, this is only the second Anne Rice book I have ever read. I read Interview with the Vampire way back in the day. Was not a fan of it. I actually enjoyed this, and it's about Ramses, who did a thing, so he's living forever. Reincarnated, perhaps? I don't know. I don't remember, but he's in, I think it's Victorian England in this book, and it's just, he has insatiable appetites for wine and women. So there's a lot of I seem to recall there's a lot of eroticism in it. And you know, it's horror. There's some crazy, horrible stuff that goes on. Not intense horror, but there's some horror. And I actually enjoyed it well enough. Not enough to make me read any more Anne Rice, but I thought it was better than Interview with the Vampire. And I guess there's 3 books in this series, apparently. Then we get to Fletch's Moxie by Gregory MacDonald. I believe this is the 5th book in the Fletch series. If you don't count Fletch 1 and Fletch 2, TOO, which are prequels. So the 7th book or the 5th book, depending on how you're looking at it. In this one, there's this Hollywood superstar named Moxie Mooney, and she's down in Florida making a movie. She gets into some trouble, calls Fletch, who she had a relationship with, calls Fletch to help her out, and excuse me, pardon me. There's a murder on the set. Moxie is prime suspect, so Fletch has to help her out. There's all sorts of shenanigans. It's a good one. I'm a big fan of the Fletch books, and I think this is a fun one. I followed that up with Fletch and the Man Who by Gregory MacDonald. Talked about this one before. Fletch becomes the press representative for a governor's presidential campaign, and so he's touring the country with this candidate, and there are women, dead women, being left behind. Like every time they leave someplace, a dead woman is discovered. So Fletch, even though he's sort of against the press in this because he's working for this candidate, he puts his investigative journalism skills to work to try to figure out what's going on with all these dead bodies and tries to keep it from affecting the candidate because he actually believes in this candidate. And I really enjoy this one. It's great. It's so weird that in the very first Fletch book, it's all about how, well, I guess it's not all about how, but he's a journalist. And then after that book, he's not actually an official journalist anymore, I think, in any of them, except for the 2 prequels. But he does always gets involved in these mysteries and puts those journalism skills to work. But Fletch and the Man Who, another good book in the Fletch series. That's it for books I can show you. Now, the last 2 books, these were books that were lent to me by Jane, and it's stuff that she read when she was younger. And, I suggested, since we wanted to, this is what I read when I was a kid, this is what I read when I was a kid. I would suggest things like Danny Dunn, the Danny Dunn series, stuff like that, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. She recommended to me the next 2 books. First, which is the penultimate book in this video, Master of Murder by Christopher Pike. And in this book, the most popular author of teenage fiction in the country, it happens to be a high school senior who uses a pseudonym to, keep people away. But somebody figures out who he is and starts messing with him. And I think there's some murder. And the author is also obsessed with some girl that's messing with his head. He's going to miss his deadline. Meh. It's Christopher Pike. Maybe I missed the boat. A little too old for it at the time that I read this. Although, well, you'll see. But I guess it was fine. I don't know. Next up, the last book that I read in February of 1998, The Star Group by Christopher Pike. And this, actually, I had to read the descriptions and things online for these because I don't remember anything about them. And the one description I found for The Star Group sounds a lot like the movie Chronicle. I believe that's the movie I'm thinking of. Because it's about 6 friends, 6 young people, I think they're just out of high school, who develop amazing powers, and one of them turns evil. At least that's the description that I found. And that sounds like Chronicle. The found footage sort of superhero movie where these dudes, I think they're all guys, find something, it gives them powers, and one of them goes nuts. Again, I think I was too old to, I don't know, to enjoy this too much. I mean, I've read, even recently, I've read like young adult stuff that I thought was good. Christopher Pike just wasn't doing it for me. So that's it. That is all that I read in February of 1998. Excuse me. My question for this video is twofold. Maybe threefold. I haven't thought it through yet. One, I don't know all the ages of the people that watch these videos. So, did you read Christopher Pike when you were the appropriate age? And if so, what did you think? Obviously a very popular author. A lot of people reading his stuff. There are podcasts, at least one podcast I know of, all about his stuff. So what do you think? Are you a Christopher Pike fan? And part 2, I said twofold earlier. I was trying to figure out how to work that into what I was going to say next, the twofold part. But part two of the question, what did you read when you were a teenager? A youngster, a teenager, young adult, you know, that age range. So for part one of the question, I think I've kind of answered that. Well, one, I wasn't the right age for reading Christopher Pike, even when it came out originally. And I wasn't thrilled with this. It was fine, but nothing that grabbed. I wasn't like, ooh, I got to read all these. So that's a no on Christopher Pike for me. As far as when I was a young adult or a teenager, excuse me, I don't know that I necessarily read like young adult stuff. I don't know that anything that would have fallen into that category was of interest to me at the time. When I was a kid, like a little kid, I read little kid stuff. Encyclopedia Brown, Danny Dunn, Hardy Boys, all of that stuff. But scary stories to tell in the dark. But as a teenager, I think there was no Christopher Pike yet. There was no R.L. Stine. So I was reading grown-up stuff. I started reading Stephen King. And, Dean Koontz. I didn't like the very first Dean Koontz I read, so it was a while before I read any more. Definitely Stephen King. I loved reading things like Edgar Allan Poe. I can't remember if I had started reading Lovecraft yet. I had a subscription to Twilight Zone magazine, so I was reading all of that with great Joe R. Lansdale, John Skipp, and Craig Spector, all sorts of great authors in there. I was reading, if you go back to the very first video in this series, that was 1985, so I would have been, how old would I have been in 1985? 18. Right? So, yes, at the beginning of 1985, I was 18. So you can see what I was reading as a young adult. If you go back to that video, I could just look in the list right here. As a matter of fact, let's grab it. We'll just, real quick, January of 1985. I was 18 years old. I read Cruel Lie by Piers Anthony, The Evil That Men Do by R. Lance Hill, The Vengeance by Robert C. Sloan, Coma by Robin Cook. Here we go. Floating Dragon, Peter Straub. Solomon Kane by Robert E. Howard. The Godfather by Mario Puzo. The Choir Boys by Joseph Wambaugh. There's some grown-up books in there. So I'd say earlier than that. So a teen, pre-adult. Lots of Conan. Lots of Piers Anthony. I had read The Hobbit somewhere in there. I don't remember if I was a teen yet or not. So also, just as always, a very eclectic group of books when I was younger. But I don't remember having teenage series, teenage books. They may have been out there and I just didn't read them because I'd already moved on to other things. I don't know if Hardy Boys falls into that, but I was reading those when I was pretty young. Always liked anthologies. Oh, I know I was reading Richard Matheson. Basically, anything I could remember reading before this list started would have been before I was 18. So things like Richard Matheson. So all sorts of stuff. So, not a very good answer to the question, I suppose. So, Christopher Pike, did you read him? What did you think? What were the things you were reading as a youngster, a teen, young adult? Let me know in the comments below. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning. We try to be polite here on my channel. Please like, share, and subscribe, all the usual YouTube stuff. And if you'd care to follow me on other social media, My Twitter is still at Ronan5757. My Instagram, where I post pictures of books, comic books, board games, and fuzzy animals, is Eric Smith 5757. That's Eric with a K. ERIKSMITH 5757. Excuse me. I was trying to make it to the end before I had to do that. But yeah, that's all I've got. So until next week, read more books.